All right, we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. All right, I want to live before the Lord. We learned this one last night. I want to live before the Lord. I want to use my faith like Abraham as he walked, he showed his faith in God's great land. I want to use my life like Esther as she lived before the Lord. I want to live like Moses by faith out to all God's commands. I want to live like Joseph. I want to live before the Lord. Before we keep going, so I have these little white dots here on purpose. That reminds us to take that breath. So when we get to the white dot, take a breath. We're going to skip that. All right, second verse. I want to use my arms like Hannah as she loved her baby and she gave him up. I want to use my mouth like Deborah as she sang before the Lord. I want to live like Moses by faith up to all God's commands. I want to live like Joseph. I want to live before the Lord. I want to use my strength like David as he loved the Lord his God with all his heart. I want to use my knees like Daniel as he kneeled before the Lord. I want to live like Moses by faith up to all God's commands. I want to live like Joseph. I want to live before the Lord. All right, let's go back to joy, joy, joy. You sing this one? Okay, I'm ready. Joy, joy, joy. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Down in my heart. Down in my heart. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Down in my heart. Down in my heart. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. I've got the love of Jesus down in my heart. Down in my heart. Down in my heart. I've got the love of Jesus down in my heart. Down in my heart to stay. I got the wonderful love of blessed people down in the depths of my heart. Down in the depths of my heart. Down in the depths of my heart. I've got the wonderful love of blessed people down in the depths of my heart. Down in the depths of my heart to stay. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Sit on attack. Sit on attack. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Sit on attack to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I got the love of Jesus in my heart. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I got the love of Jesus in my heart. Down in my heart. Sorry, that's an addition from my dad. He was a bass, and he would sing it a whole lot lower than that, where nobody could possibly sing with it. But that was a Reynolds family favorite. All right, y'all were great singers. How are we doing on time? All right, our Judges song. We learned this one last night, and we're studying about the Judges this week. Who remembers who was last night? Who did we study about? Yes, Riley. What's her name? Remember her name? Deborah. There we go. Okay, last night was Deborah. Tonight is going to be Gideon. Gideon. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. What the army, what the soldiers cried out when it was time. Okay, so tonight, our judges song. Oh, kneel thee, Hashem, guard Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Agam, Samson, Eli, Samuel. One more time. Oh, kneel thee, Hashem, guard Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Agam, Samson, Eli, Samuel. Samuel. Got one in our midst. All right, the Lord's army. I thought this was a good one because tonight Gideon, he is going to lead an army. What you're going to learn about tonight is Gideon's army ended up not being very big. And the not very big army was because who was going to win the battle for them? God was going to be winning the battle. That is exactly right. All right, the Lord's army. Stand up with me. Stand with me. We got to march. And if you're going to fly, be careful not to hit your friend in the head. So if you need to scoot out a little bit, you can. Somebody needs to scoot back and somebody needs to move forward. All right. Ready to march? I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, 'cause I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! Whew, y'all are good singers. I love this. Okay, we're gonna boost our VBS. Are you ready? You ready? Booster, booster, be a booster. Don't be crashing like a rooster. Booster, booster, be a booster. And boost our VBS. All right, 3 and 4-year-olds, you ready to go? Your teachers are ready. All right, let's go to class. 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 All right
Check, check. It's on. Good evening, everybody. It's amazing to see the enthusiasm of that versus when I said good evening and no one said a word. What happened to all of us? Good evening, everybody. Good evening. There is life yet. I find that so fascinating. Turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Judges chapter 6. Obviously, tonight we have the subject of Gideon, and I didn't know much about Gideon before I started preparing for this lesson. It's an interesting character to study and learn about. And thank you for coming tonight. Welcome. If you typically don't attend here at Milwaukee Avenue, you're our honored guest. Thank you for joining us. And as a teacher, I am still getting the hang of it. I really like reading the Bible, and I gain a lot of my inspiration from just reading because I find the stories to be absolutely fascinating. And from that, we can deem a lot of interesting parallelisms and connections throughout the rest of the Bible. And what we can do is simply read. And I am not going to do a lecture, and for this session, I think we can just have a nice dialogue. So if you have something to say, any comments, just shout Justin or raise your hand. I probably won't look up because I'm too scared to look at all of you, but we'll read the Bible together. So just get my attention and we can have our comments, and I'll propose some interesting questions as we go along. So Judges chapter 6, let's start reading. It says, "Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." Isn't that a shame? Because Israel is the chosen people of God, right? They were taken out of the land of Egypt. They were the promised people, promised to Abraham, through your descendants. They will be numbered more than the stars in the sky. And here they are doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Can anybody sort of give us an insight into what that evil might have been? It's probably not just one thing, but we can get our minds created. We just talked about Deborah last night, and here we are just a few minutes next in the future, and we already have a generation of Israelites doing what's evil in the sight of the Lord. What evil could they have been doing? Idolatry. That's a huge thing to talk about, and we can set the foundation for this right now. Idolatry. What is that? What is idolatry? Anything before God. Anything before God. More specifically, as what we read about in the Old Testament, idolatry being what was among the other people that inhabited this land. It was literally statues carved out of either wood or stone that they worshipped, right? Was it more than that? It might have been, I don't know. Metals, okay, sure, the cast in some sort of metal, gold. That was even done by the Israelites below the mountain of God, right? They made the golden calf. I've always been curious. I told Nate today when we were talking that one of the things that always drew me away was, why did Moses strike the rock the second time? This great man of God, why did he fall right at the finish line almost? It's the same thing with the Israelites. Why, having the knowledge of God, having the tradition, having your grandparents and your parents having seen the wondrous, miraculous things that we would think to be a magic show, they actually physically saw that. And yet they still turn to these lifeless creatures, these lifeless pieces of artwork, and they worship them. It's always befuddled me. It says that they did evil in the sight of the Lord. What else could be considered evil, do you think, that these people did? There's nothing new under the sun, right? So basically everything we do today, right? That's one of the things, right? So if they do evil in the sight of the Lord, they no longer obey. They no longer obey God. They no longer teach their children. Sam. It's a
That's the temptation. Israelites always. All the other not a way.
right. So Sam, if you couldn't hear him, basically putting self first. It's something that I want to do. I want to serve this God basically because it's easier. I get to do what I want. I get to put my talents first. I get to do my offerings. I have conversations with my best friend who's a fantastic drummer. He's the best drummer in town. And he and I just really get into it when it comes down to, I want to offer what I get to offer. And it's something that I believe is really rampant in this time. Sam's right on the money with that. The fact that obedience has fallen so far in this generation, do you think that that led to prosperity among the Israelites? I'm sure some of us have already read the story, some of us may not. So let's see what happens. Verse 1. Well, that was a lot of discussion. We haven't even gone through the first verse yet. I really need to pick up the pace. I apologize. Verse 1. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. What's interesting about the number 7? Have we seen that before in the Bible? Where does that bring recollection of parallelisms? You're shaking your head, yes. You shouldn't do any type of kinesthetic articulation or I will call on you. Sorry? 7 days of creation. 7 years that they were in, in the hands of Midian. What else is 7? How many times should my brother offend me and I forgive him? 7? 7 times 7. Isn't that interesting? I find that fascinating, the numbers of the Bible. Verse 2. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Weren't they given this land? Weren't they supposed to inhabit this land? Didn't their fathers fight for this land? Didn't they obey God? And they were given Jericho, the huge walled cities, walls so thick that they had chariot races on top of the walls. And here they are dwelling in what? The enthusiasm. We need to bring the 5-year-old out. Thank you. I know I have the microphone, but you guys talk back. So they're living in caves in the dens, which were in the mountains. That's not a place for the people to be. But perhaps it makes them think about their situation. And they didn't do it. So here we are. The generations passed, right? That's coming back to haunt them. For it was when Israel had sown, that's the fields, that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, and they would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. So being brought down very low. I don't know if anybody studied any military campaigns, but I was very fortunate to take a few of these classes in my undergrad, and I was fascinated by military strategy and the economic impact of what is called total war. Total war has happened in the past 100 years during World War I and World War II, where the entire engine of economy for all the nation, and indeed even the whole world, was focused on war. And that brings about some prosperity, but most of the time it brings death and destruction. What does it say that the Midianites did for their campaign? And God allowed them to do this, but how did they do it? Yeah, so like they would plant their crops, right? And that's an investment. So the Israelites would plant crops, great. And they would spring up overnight? No, they had to wait seasons, right? So spring and the summer, they water, they tend the crops. Yay, we get to have the investment of time in the things that are coming out of the ground. And then by the time the fall arrives and it's almost time for harvest, then they hear the beating of the drums and the bleating of the camels coming. And then they come and ravish the land. So they were brought down very low. Can you imagine somebody coming in? Let's say it was Amarillo, let's just say. And Amarillo comes down to take all of our cotton away and all of our food. And there's nothing on the shelves at Market Street. What do we do? Where do we turn? Well, the Israelites, after they were living in the caves and had forgotten God, and they were doing evil in the sight of the Lord, it says, in verse 6, it says what? What's the only place that they can turn? They cried out to the Lord. Where else could they go, right? That's the place to go. You're always supposed to turn back to God. What should they have done first? What should they have never done in the first place? That's exactly right. Verse 7. Now it came about, when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord on account of Midian, that the Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel. And he said to them, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, It was I who brought you up from Egypt, and brought you out from the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians, and from the hands of all your oppressors, and dispossessed them before you, and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not obeyed me. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. Let's stop there. He was beating out the wheat, okay, so he was able to actually successfully harvest some wheat, and he was beating it out where? In the place where you're supposed to beat wheat out? Where was he doing it? Where you make wine. So when you make wine, it's made for liquid, right, and you don't want anything to go away. So the way I was researching this and what it says is that the wine presses of old were either in the ground or they were some sort of container that would hold the wine when you press the grapes. Okay? So he was doing this as a tactical way of no one seeing him doing it. A threshing floor, have you heard this before? So in a threshing floor, it is a paved area in the open that, instead of using a tractor, which they didn't have, they would beat the wheat on the ground and the wind would blow away the chaff. Or they would have oxen pulling a threshing board, which is what they call it, I guess. And it crushes the wheat and then the wind blows the chaff away and they gather what's left. So if they were doing that, would he have been out in the open? Would he have been seen? Would they have come and taken his stuff? Yes. So perhaps this is what one of the things that Gideon was doing. Pretty smart, right? It's also a bit of a way of looking at it from the standpoint of, should he have been doing that in the first place? Should Gideon have been strong enough to trust in the Lord, maybe? Or maybe this was just the way people thought it had to be done. I don't know. What do you guys think? It makes sense, right? Verse 12. The angel of the Lord appeared to him, Gideon, and said to him, The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. Then Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? He said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Because, behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house. But the Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. So Gideon said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you, and bring out my offering and lay it before you. And he said, I will remain until you return. Now we'll take a brief pause here. It's interesting to say, okay, this is a person who was hiding from the Midianites. He was doing his work to probably feed his family, doing what he could to keep it from the enemy coming and taking it. And then to have a messenger. It doesn't say that he was in blinding white robes. It doesn't say that it was a winged messenger. It just says the angel of the Lord. When you see the angel of the Lord, what do you think? There are other accounts of angels coming and meeting people. They don't even know who they are. Right? That's what I think. It doesn't matter what I think. What do you think? Could it have been very impressive to see this person, this angel? Could it have been did he bow down and worship him immediately? It doesn't, right? That's kind of where my mind goes. Maybe this was just a person. Because what I find fascinating is what we just read at the end of that section, which Gideon, having said, well, if you are, then wait and I'll be right back. That's curious to me. Why didn't he just believe him? Would you have believed him? Did Gideon know this person? Did he see him before? Probably a stranger to him, right? I'm always fascinated by the concept of a messenger of God coming and seeing you. It's like, hey, Justin, you're going to save your entire nation. Right. That might be your reaction, right? It definitely was Gideon's, I think. We read in 17 again. So Gideon said to him, if now I have found favor in your sight, show me a sign that it is you, capital Y, who speak with me. So he tests the angel. Let's see what happens. Please don't depart from here. And the angel said, I will remain until you return. That's an interesting God, to me at least. Because if I was writing this story, as an author perhaps, I would have said, why don't you wait here and I'll go test you? And the angel would be like, how about I go find somebody else? Isn't that interesting? I feel like I'm talking and y'all are listening and nodding. What do you think? Any comments? Any questions? Yes, sir. Exactly. I think Sam hit the word on the head. Patience, right? This is the patience of God. Has Gideon ever had an encounter, perhaps in his whole life, with God? Was he like Moses? Did he see him face to face? Was he trained over the course of 40 years? This is probably his first encounter, right? He's experiencing 7 years of being beat down. Their food is stolen. They have no livestock. They're probably starving. These are not good times. The Bible says that they were brought very low. Very low. Then Gideon went in and prepared a young goat. Why was it young, I wonder? Probably because the older ones were taken. He prepared a young goat and unleavened bread with an ephah of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, and brought them out to him under the oak, and presented them. How long was that angel waiting? Longer than it would take for me to get upset at Abuelos. Right? I would have walked out. So he prepares a goat, and long time. This guy waited a long time. Longer than it would take him for me to get upset at Abuelos. Okay? I need to work on my patience. I'm just going to be real. He brought them out under the oak and presented them. Verse 20. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread. And fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Dramatic, right? I guess he was tired of waiting. Perhaps not. That's an amazing sign, isn't it, for someone who perhaps has never seen anything miraculous with his own eyes. Imagine that now. Imagine that, let's just play that the guy in the black shirt is the angel, right? And y'all brought me something and and I'm gone. Vanished. Like David Copperfield. What would that make you think? You also have to put out the fact that we are like New Testament and Christian, etc. But imagine that miraculous sign, especially after 7 years of torment, starvation, seeing your friends die.
So if you think about Gideon, talks to first thing he says is, the Lord's not with us anymore. We heard about all the signs where recently? We heard about all the signs all the way back in Egypt.
Right.
So I'm under the impression that he needs to go around every day seeing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, this is probably the first time. Right? So it should have been. But curious, it's not like on that day, God,
Right.
God that's silent. Apparently, that
Exactly.
doesn't mean God didn't do anything. I think he didn't know it.
The other thing to think about is the concept of the timeline. For us, it's chapters. For them, it's their lives. It's generations. 40 years of peace. I'm not even 40 yet. I'm 35. So huge chunks of time. People aren't living 700, 800, 900 years anymore. That was only a few chapters in Genesis. People are living normal, long lives, 70, 80, 100 years. Sometimes they're dying in battle. Generations go by. So that's really what we're seeing. Verse 22. The angel vanished from his sight, verse 22, when Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord. So perhaps Gideon did not see that he was the angel. He was just some dude. All right, well, if you are the angel, let me go give you an offering. Then he sees this miraculous sign. He vanishes in his sight. Jesus also did that as well. He also vanished from the sight of his disciples. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." There's no exclamation point. My version doesn't have an exclamation point. That's an exclamation to me. I've seen him face to face. He saw with his eyes. The Lord said to him, "Peace to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." That's the most profound statement anybody could ever say to anybody, or God could say to us. Peace to you, which Jesus said peace all the time. I bring you peace, peace. Peace be with you. Paul says grace be with you, grace and peace. The angel and the Lord indeed says to Gideon, "Peace to you, do not fear. You shall not die." What did the Lord call him when he first talked to him? Somebody other than Nate. What did the angel of the Lord, tell Gideon? He says, "O valiant warrior." Someone hiding in a wine press, threshing out his wheat. The Lord says, "Peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die." Then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, "The Lord is Peace." That's something not to be brushed over, not something to be taken aside. That is a profound change in the person hiding, threshing the wheat. He builds an altar to the Lord. What is an altar and what does it do? Okay, it's probably a stone tablet, right? And they kill animals and they do sacrifices to God. It's a place to do a fire, burnt offerings. Who did the first burnt offering? Anybody know? Who did the first burnt offering ever? Who? Abel. Interesting. I know that he gave an offering. I don't know if it was the first burnt offering on an altar. Perhaps. It's exactly right. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. I just read it, which is why I said this, is that Noah, when he came off the ark, he made an altar to the Lord. He made a burnt offering. It was a soothing aroma. Anyway, I just thought that was a curious quip. It has nothing to do with Gideon. I got sidetracked. I digest. Good. Peace to you. If someone told you that you weren't going to die, what would you do? If you were said that you weren't going to die, what would you do? I don't even know your name. If you'd be happy that you wouldn't die? I mean, okay, what would you do? Like, I'd go to Market Street and I'd dance around. I don't know. What would you do? Okay, that's good news, right? If you were told that you weren't going to die, what would you do? Wouldn't believe it, right? Not until somebody vanished from your eyes, perhaps. That's something curious to say. Think about it. Gideon was called a warrior, a valiant warrior. Then he says, by the Lord, and it doesn't say how. The angel is no longer there. So maybe he's starting to hear voices. Right? Isn't that interesting how when the world looks at spiritual people, they kind of think they're crazy? He hears things. He's weird. He's building an ark. That guy's weird. They know things perhaps that we don't. Or at that time. Yes, sir. Yes.
To that point, it is strange because I know it's not topic in the Bible that years now today they did that
Really weird.
the Lord formed up my I made for that way. I know that it was the same way, which is the reason that people that we follow in the Bible, they came to us now until that
The protection for us is written in the New Testament, where we or an angel of heaven tell you anything other than it's written in the book, let him be accursed. So there's a protection for the crazed loons that come and tell us that they've seen God.
It's hard to play. I mean, the way it's hard to play, that like if I was getting leader or someone told me. French.
Well, but that's the thing, is the open-mindedness of obedience to God. Because let's just pretend that Israel hadn't been doing evil in the sight of God. Let's say that there was this beautiful tradition of what we experience in David's time in 1 Samuel, where there was just obedience and there was knowledge and they were freely giving to one another, and someone was touched by the Lord. Well, let's see what happens whenever this is proven. Gideon builds an ark. He names it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it is still an Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Verse 25. Now on the same night, the Lord said to him, "Take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father." I thought that was odd. My father owns an altar of Baal. Pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it. An Asherah is a wooden carved statue. It's an idol, but it is a statue. And build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold in an orderly manner. And take a second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you had cut down. So cut down the altar and then burn it to make an offering to me. That's his instructions. So let's stop there. If Gideon did it, great reward, right? Obedience to God shows his faith. If Gideon didn't do it, would he have been written in the book of Judges? Probably not. Let's keep reading. Verse 27. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had spoken to him. And because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. But God had just told him that he wasn't going to die. Why would there be fear? God literally just said, do not fear, you will not die. He builds an altar, who knows how long that takes, but that very night he has this command. Why is he afraid of his father's household and the men of the city? What do you guys think? Okay. Fear, respect, perhaps? I think, yeah. I don't know. Something at least. Any other thoughts, Sam? Especially inside your family. That's one of the big takeaway points, is that this altar didn't just belong to the city, it was his dad's altar. Nate.
The thing to take into account is what altars were. We talk about idol worship, not party. Idols were sacrifice.
Oh,
Were the idols, the worst of the idols.
right.
So these people who worship these kind of things, kind of folk deity, they didn't have a propensity to love people. It didn't provoke love. It provoked sacrificing children. These altars. False. So, if you are engrossed in a religion that provokes evil that way, and preaches that, don't expect to have a lot of generosity and love towards you when you do something against them that the other people don't like.
Because of his actions, it says that he did it, right? He actually tore down this altar, and he cut down this statue. But he did it by night. He says he was afraid. What does that speak to Gideon and his faith in God? He had some because he obeyed. Because he didn't do it during the day when anybody could see him. When Jesus made a whip and he went into the temple and he drove out the money changers, did he do it at night when nobody was there and it was abandoned? He did it during the day. He drove the people out. He brandished a weapon, right? For him, he did it by night. Is Gideon the person to be mentioned in Hebrews 11 right now? Is he this champion of faith at this time in the story? No, right? I'm laying them up here, folks. Just yes, sir.
I would say that he is. I think this speaks to the heart.
Yeah. I'm not you can nitpick anything I say. I know probably less than a lot of people everywhere. I just like reading. But I think that's a fascinating concept to look at it, is that the point that I was probably seeing is that he's young. This is his first main thing to obey. He's been given a command. He has to obey. Sam's saying that God can already see the man he will become. He already calls him the thing. He knows what he's going to do, perhaps. Gideon, I think, could have done anything other than obeying. But the growth is there. And this is a testament to us, is that we can be the person that God wants us to be. And the takeaway is obedience, even if people think we're nuts. So he did it by night. Verse 28. When the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was torn down, and the Asherah which was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar which had been built. What happened to the Asherah that was cut down? Right? He used it and he burnt it. So this is past tense. They woke up in the morning and he had already offered the bull. So that beautiful wooden statue that they had worshipped is gone. because it was used to burn the bull. That's a sight to see. They said to one another, "Who did this thing?" And when they searched about and inquired, they said, "Gideon the son of Joash did this thing." Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son, that he may die, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah which was beside it. It took us so long to carve it." Are these Amalekites? Are these Midianites? Who are these people? These are the Israelites. They cut down the altar to Baal. That's how rampant idolatry is in these people. That's sad. Bring out your son. Where was he? Was he hiding? It's exhausted, probably, from the night's work. I find that, bring out your son, right? He must have been inside somewhere, I don't know. But Joash said to all who stood against him, verse 31, "Will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him? Whoever will plead for him shall be put to death by morning if he is a god. Let him contend for himself, because someone has torn down his altar." Therefore, on that day, he named him Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he had torn down his altar. That's probably the love of the father, right, for his son. Because if he didn't love his son, if he loved the altar of Baal more, it was his altar, he would have delivered him. Yeah, take him, kill him. I'm mad at him. That's an interesting, wise concept, isn't it? I feel like I'm talking. Somebody say something else. Anybody, please. Going once. It's an interesting concept to think that the father went to the defense of his son, even though he had done this thing. Probably had taken away his living. They probably had to pay some money to come up to the altar, perhaps. It's nothing, there's no revelation of that, but there is some sort of economy in idolatry. We know from the Athenians, or at least, it was Athenians, that the temple of Dionysus was this huge economic center. People coming to worship, right? So, let Baal contend against him. Does he? Verse 33. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. What season do you think it was in the year? Context clues. He was threshing wheat. So it was around the harvest time, right? So it's time. It's time for us to go get all that sweet, sweet promised land for the Israelites, right? So the Midianites and the Amalekites assemble. And they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Crossed over what? Speak up. The Jordan River, bingo. So they crossed over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. That's not something to be brushed aside either. When the Spirit of the Lord came upon someone, what does the Spirit of the Lord provide us? It says that if we obey, John 14:15, that God will bring us a comforter, that the Holy Spirit dwells within us in the New Testament times. Is this a good thing? It's amazing. Let's read what happens. This is when it gets good. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet. And the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. I have another side quip in my studies of music. The trumpet and brass instruments are played, we probably know well because America is a band society. But the trumpet, and indeed there's an instrument that was the precursor to the trombone called the sackbut, and it is an elongated instrument. It's the one that you see that was always in the Renaissance paintings. And how to do that is by, I can't do it because I'm a singer, but like you purse the lips into the embouchure, and that's what gets the sound. That was a held secret by the Trumpeters Guild in the medieval times by penalty of death if they told anybody outside the guild how to play a brass instrument, they would kill them in the medieval times. It's an interesting side. So whenever he says that he blew a trumpet, that's interesting. Anyway, so the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he blew a trumpet. And the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they also were called together to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will deliver Israel through me, as you have spoken, behold, I will put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor." Not in the winepress, in the threshing floor. "I will put it on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I will know that you will deliver Israel through me, as you have spoken." And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not let your anger burn against me, that I may speak once more. Please let me make a test once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew on all the ground." God did so that night, for it was dry only on the fleece, and dew was on the ground. I don't really have any comments other than just to say that I find this completely fascinating that Gideon tests God not once but twice. Except, what does it say in verse 34? We just read it. That the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So perhaps it wasn't Gideon testing God. What does it say in the following verses after 34? He sends messengers to all the people of Israel, and everyone, the armed men, assembles. Now he's on the threshing floor. The threshing floor is out in the open. It's a paved area. It's an gregarious society, right? So it's a main area for people to use. And there he is out in the open, and he lays this fleece down. Was this for Gideon? Perhaps. Perhaps it was. For him to gain in faith, to gain understanding and knowledge. But I also have another thought. Imagine the scene. Imagine all of these armed men who have now traveled a significant distance, longer than it would take to get tired. More than a few miles. With your armor and your gear and your food and your kit and everybody else following behind you. You're going to war. And there's this sign. There's this dude. He's of Manasseh. We don't like that tribe. They're not really people we talk about. They're not the ones that we tell our kids about. And then there's this sign. To me, I think it's him proving his worth to these other people. Now, he already sends a call. Hey, we're going to war, come. But now I think this is really solidifying Gideon's, this guy, the Lord is with this guy. 2 nights we've seen this fleece be dry, and there's a bowl of water, and it's dry. And then it's wet, and this is dry. So to me, that's what I take away from it. What do y'all think? Right? It's time.
I've always approached it with probably most people have. That is he is or made that.
Yeah. So it works. We're going to war. And God is with this man. Finally. Now we get to fight against the Midianites. Judges 7. Y'all, we're trucking along. We've got 30 minutes. We got to pick it up. Then Jerubbaal, who? That is Gideon. Remember, he's renamed by his dad. And all the people who were with him rose early. That's another concept that I'll probably try to do a study over, is that rising early. That happens over and over. That just struck me. Like, they rose early. What? You late sleepers. All right, rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. On the way to Colorado, where my family recently vacationed, you go through what's called the safety corridor. And it is the most boring drive ever, except for the fact that you're ringed in with kind of mountainy mountains, but they're like a few thousand feet. And you're in a valley, it's flat. I've never been to the Middle East. I've never seen the Holy Land. I can only assume that whenever you are encamped over here, and there is a valley, and then you see an encampment over there, that you are in visible distance, but you're out of arrow shot, you're relatively safe. These are the things to think about. The Lord said to Gideon, "The people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into your hands. For Israel would become boastful, saying, 'My own power has delivered me.' Now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, 'Whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead.'" So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. How many people were assembled? Simple math. 32-ish thousand people, right? For war. 32,000 people is the size of my hometown, Greenville, Texas. 32,000 people. So 32,000 people assembled. God, very wisely, says, okay, I'm doing a miraculous thing here, right? I'm trying to let this judge take control and bring the Israelites back into obedience to me. These are too many people. He sees into their hearts. Whoever is afraid and trembling. Was Gideon afraid and trembling? Probably not, because God told him, don't be afraid, you will not die. There's strength in that. So, 22,000 people returned. That's a long trip to just turn around and go home. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "The people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Therefore it shall be that he of whom I say to you, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go with you. But anyone of whom I say to you, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "You shall separate everyone who laps the water with his tongue as a dog laps, as well as everyone who kneels to drink." Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people kneeled to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, "I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped, and will give the Midianites into your hands. So let all the other people go, each man to his home." So the 300 men took the people's provisions and their trumpets into their hands. And Gideon sent all the other men of Israel, each to his tent, but retained the 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Is Gideon obeying God? So I think we've already established that faith equals obedience, right? So God's having a dialogue with him. He's telling him what to do, and Gideon's obeying him. This is all pretty miraculous, I would think. Like, we're terrified. I send the people are coming, and like 22,000 people are gone. Now there's 10,000, still too many. Let's separate them even further. What's the significance of water? Okay. Have you ever thought about how you drink water? Through a cup, right? You ever been on a long journey? Probably people who laid down to lap the water. I remember, have you seen the movie Tron? I always think, like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Tron, but there's two ways. The guy take their frisbee and they drink, and one guy like gets on his belly and like laps it up. So the people who are really thirsty, I guess. It's interesting. The concept of water in the Bible is a fascinating one. Whenever the Israelites were saved from the Egyptians, what was it by? Water. When we are baptized into Christ, we're baptized of water. It's a fascinating concept. So God divides the people into 300 men by how they drank water. I find it curious. This is also curious. 300. At Thermopylae, there was a similar incident that history tells us that Leonidas, king of Sparta, and this is real, this actually happened, though it was also a graphic novel, was made into a movie, but that this was an actual military battle from these Spartan Greeks, and they withstood for a brief time Xerxes and his forces as they were attacking. 300 men is an interesting concept. I wonder if, I know this came first. This biblical account was written several hundred years before that proposed event at Thermopylae. I wonder if this happened first. I wonder if the other one actually happened at all, or if it was some sort of adaptation of this account. We don't really know, but it was curiosity. So he has 300 men, and they're above the camp of Midian. They're below them in the valley. Verse 9. Now the same night it came about that the Lord said to him, Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hands. But if you are afraid to go down, go with Purah, your servant, down to the camp, and you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened, so that you may go down against the camp. Why did God even give him that choice? Why didn't he just say, go do it? You're not going to die, go. Yeah, I think that's just, once again, God being patient. Obviously, he knows he's afraid. He can see inside his heart. He knows his mind. He knows our minds even. If you are afraid, go down with your servant Purah, 2 men. You will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened. So he went with Purah, his servant, down to the outposts of the army that was in the camp. Verse 12. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley, as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Have you ever seen a plague? I haven't. Have you seen a raft of people? How many people can fit at Jones AT&T Stadium? One more? Fair enough. That's 50,000 people. So 50,000. I know. Well, yeah, I'm sure they've added on. Well, I know that the University of Texas can seat 100,000 people. Their football stadium, 100,000 people. I didn't look to see the largest stadium, but I'm assuming it's upwards of like 120,000 people. 120,000 people, all confined to watch a sporting event, right? It says that they were without number. I don't know, the Bible has some pretty big numbers. That's something to look down into a valley and see nothing but people. No grass, no trees, just people. Camels, livestock, ready for war. Verse 13, when Gideon came, behold, a man was relating a dream to his friend, and he said, Behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it so that it fell, and tumbled it upside down so that the tent lay flat. His friend replied, This is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. When Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. That's a takeaway point. He's in the enemy. He's in their encampment. And he bows to worship God. Do not be afraid, for you will not die. There's great faith here, brothers and sisters. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hands. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. He said to them, Look at me and do likewise, and behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you also blow the trumpets all around the camp and say, For the Lord and for Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, when they had just posted the watch. And they blew the trumpets and smashed the pitchers that were in their hands. When the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers, they held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and cried, A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Each stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran, crying out as they fled. When they blew 300 trumpets, the Lord set the sword of one another against one against another, even throughout the whole army. And the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zererah, as far as the edge of Abel Meolah by Tabbath. The men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and take the waters before them, as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they took the waters as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. They captured the two leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and they killed Zeb at the winepress of Zeb, while they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. It was a rout. In military terms, when you are organized and you are standing shield to shield and sword to sword with the people beside you, there is strength. Worlds were conquered with that tactic. It was a few centuries later that the Greeks figured out, if I take my sword and put it on the end of a 15-foot stick, I don't die. And so, using the phalanx, they conquered the world. These military tactics were very sound, but it relied on the people standing next to you. Except when we have champions fighting champions, which is David and Goliath. A rout happens whenever one person runs, the next person runs, and the lines break. And what we see here is a full-on rout of the Midianite army, where they mounted, perhaps, if they were lucky enough to have a camel or a horse or some sort of vehicle, perhaps a chariot, they were probably able to get away for a short time. If they were on foot, they probably were chased down. They were without number. Verses 300. There is blood. There is pain. There is screaming. There's agony. But Gideon and his obedience, they delivered the people of God. What happened to the two kings, Oreb and Zeb? They were killed. Worse, they were beheaded. In their own houses, probably. When I read this, perhaps it doesn't really matter, but for curiosity's sake, Oreb and Zeb, Oreb was killed at the rock of Oreb. Now, either they called it that because that's where he was killed, or maybe that was just his rock. Maybe he ran home. And Zeb was killed at his winepress, which is interesting because that's where we found Gideon. Probably not at Zeb's, but the fact that, well, the way I read it is they ran home, and they pursued them as far as their homes. Judges 8. We have 21 minutes. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing that you've done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?" Did Gideon not call them? Or were they not needed? Let's read on. And they contended with him vigorously. But he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. That silver-tongued devil, he was able to talk himself out of his brothers being angry, right? What's a lesson to take away from that? Come on, guys. Okay. Soft answer turns away wrath. Or the pen is mightier than the sword, you know? Maybe not the pen. There's words, pens, okay. Bear with me. So, he subsides his brother's anger. Then Gideon and the 300 men. Interesting. Did any of them die in the battle? Not a one. Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing. Which way are they going? I didn't bring up a map, I apologize. But so when the Midianites came, they crossed over, they were going west, and now they're fleeing, they're routing, and they crossed over the Jordan. Now they're traveling east. They're crossing over the Jordan to pursue the Midianites back to their homes, and they're tired. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon said, "All right. When the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." He went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them. And the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Succoth had answered. So he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies were with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the entire army of the sons of the east. For the fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. More people than can fit in the stadium at the University of Texas. Dead. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. Once again, probably at night. We know this well from Texas history. It's probably the best time to attack is at night when everybody's drunk. When they were unsuspecting, it says. How many were in Gideon's company? Still 300, right? When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, it was another rout. 15,000 people versus 300. It was another rout. When they fled, he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. And he captured a youth from Succoth and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. He came to the men of Succoth and said, "Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary?" He took the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with him. He tore down the tower of Penuel, and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor?" And they said, "They were like you, each one resembling the son of a king." He said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise, kill them." But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise up yourself and fall on us, for as the man, so is his strength." So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. That's not something to be swept aside either. What did Gideon do after he killed these kings? It says he took these ornaments. What are these ornaments? Jewels, precious metals. They were kings, by the way. They had to show that they were kingly. So he took some prize. He took some spoil. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Yet Gideon said to them, "I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil." For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, "We will surely give them." So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, somewhere between 55 and 75 pounds. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neck bands that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city Ophrah and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. It was not something to take lightly. He is a great man of faith. He did do great obedience. But he also took the spoil of war. And he made it into an ephod, which is what was worn by the priest. Now, perhaps we won't dwell too much. We're running out of time. But it's something interesting when it says that this great man of faith created something from this spoil, this great accomplishment, this great obtaining of faith, and this huge, amazing undertaking, which they wanted to make him a king. And for him to create something with it, that would be a snare for him and his family. An interesting aside from the point of history. If someone took you today and said, you be the president of the United States, you be the king of the world, you rule over us, would you have the courage to do what Gideon did? I've said this repeatedly in different aspects, but I had to add Gideon. As I said, I was very unknowledgeable about Gideon until I read this. From my studies of history, there have been 3 men in the history of the world who have been given the complete power and reign over an entire nation of people and turned it down. The first was Cincinnatus. He was a Roman general that was able to conquer the Gaulish people. I don't remember which Caesar it was, but they said, I'm basically going to give you half of the kingdom of Rome. And he said, no, I'd rather just go back to my farm. And he did. The next person to do that in the line was George Washington. That they said, we want to make you king. He said, no, I don't want to be the king. Because he was a proponent and a student of Cincinnatus. What does Cincinnatus sound like? Cincinnati. So when they founded in the Ohio Territory, Cincinnati, this is where these people came from. Jesus was the third. And now Gideon is the fourth. To be said, we want you to be king over us. And he says, no, the Lord will be our king. It wouldn't be a couple generations later that the people of Israel would once again call to the Lord for a king. Let's finish with our coda, our epilogue. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. And the land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. What else is 40? That's an interesting number in the Bible as well. Let's just rattle it off. 40, what does it bring to mind? Other parallelisms. It rained upon the earth. How long was Jesus fasting in the wilderness? 40 days and 40 nights. So for 40 years there was peace in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, that is to say Gideon, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a ripe old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. But I thought God told him that he wouldn't die. Perhaps. Perhaps the Spirit did not always dwell within him. We don't know. And I'm not making any type of accusation here, but it's an interesting observation that he died at a ripe old age. Wouldn't it be nice to die at a ripe old age? Then it came about as soon as Gideon was dead, as soon as he was dead, that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. Kind of sad. This great warrior, this great deliverer, and while he was alive, there was peace. And as soon as he died, they're back at it. What does that say to us? What's some life lessons that we can take away from our elongated study of Gideon? I apologize. Thank you for bearing with me. It's an interesting story. When you have studied Gideon, what do you take away? We talked about faith. That's right. Obedience through faith. Sam pointed out, God knows what we can be. He sees the person that we can grow into. Was Gideon tested? Just shout it out. I don't. Say it again. Go. That's exactly right. I think that's an amazing takeaway point, is that it's